Good evening. Good evening? Much better. Let me try to open this. Leine has recently said that the Arctic is more than just a cold place. It is a paradise. This sentence reminded me of what Marcel Proust once said about paradise. The only true paradise is always a paradise we have lost. I think there may be something in this sentence about the Arctic in some strange way, and I imagine that both Simon Winchester and Leine will have something to say about the dangers of the Arctic today and what may in fact be on the way of being lost. My name is Paul Holdengraber. I'm the Director of Public Programs here for another day and a half, as I will be leaving in a few days for Los Angeles. It's been a great pleasure and privilege to serve you for 14 days. As you know, my goal at the library has been, I hope I've fulfilled it from time to time, to make these wonderful two lions that, you know, have names, Patience and Fortitude. You will always remember that Fortitude is on the side of 42nd Street. I try to make them roar. I try to make them come alive. I try, when I can, to make this building less of a heavy building and to make it, when successful, in an event like tonight, I hope, levitate. It's been an extraordinary project, this project which you're about to witness the end of, the Arctic imagination. It came out of the wild imagination of my very dear, true, beloved Danish friends. We, once upon a time, maybe 4 or 5 years ago, I can't quite remember, spoke about this idea of doing a project on the Arctic imagination. I love the name of it, and it became an exquisite book, which I highly recommend that you all get. It's just absolutely beautiful, and it is, as it says on the cover, New York, Nuuk, I hope I pronounced that well, Nuuk, I can't pronounce these names, Oslo, Copenhagen, Stockholm. So it's a project between 5 countries and 5 libraries. And in the process of these years, we've spoken to all kinds of people. I began the project many years ago in Copenhagen, speaking with Olafur Eliasson, who then came to the library. We had the pleasure of having Naomi Klein and Laurie Anderson and a number of other people. And all of this happened on the initiative, I think the dual initiative, our initiative, but even much more the initiative of all of my very beloved Danish friends who I will now thank. First of all, the Black Diamond, which is the Royal Library of Copenhagen, which is an extraordinary place. I highly recommend you come to it. And then before I go further, I would like to say that Lise Bach Hansen, who is the head of programming of the Royal Library of Denmark, known as the Black Diamond, will tell you something about this project.
Thank you very much, Paul. When you take the flight from Copenhagen to New York, you fly over Greenland, and for hours you see nothing but snow and ice and rocks and frozen rivers and fjords. And you look at this mysterious landscape from the flight and you ask yourself, can it really be that it is so fragile? And but it is. And this year was the second warmest year in the Arctic we ever recorded, according to the Arctic Report Card. So we asked ourselves in this project, as Paul told you about, what do we do when the ice in the Arctic disappears? So over the course of 2017 and 2018, the great libraries, as you just mentioned, in New York, Copenhagen, Stockholm, Oslo, and Nuuk, joined the Consulate General of Denmark and Library Group from Sweden to present this Arctic imagination. We raised the question on the disappearing ice among artists and writers, different conversations partners on stage in different countries, in different cities, in Greenland, and on both sides of the Atlantic Sea. And we have presented a range of events, readings, live conversations, exhibitions, video statements, and it was all based on the library collections. And we have now published this book that Paul just showed you. So what we thought about, Paul and I, when we developed this project was that climate change scientists and activists and politicians actually, and diplomats, they have struggled for a long time with this issue for years actually, but we thought it was time for the libraries to enter the arenas. For what better place to envision our future than in the very places where our past is preserved. And this is one of the houses. So by delving into the past, we have imagined the future, we tried to. And then what kind of answers did we get? We have had 30 live events now, and one thing is very clear. The question has not a distinct answer. On the contrary, the question on the melting ice is raising immediately new questions. And tonight we continue with our guests, Simon Winchester and Kim Leine, from each side of the Atlantic, exactly as the concept of this project was thought to be. And I'm happy to be here at the New York Public Library for this final event, and I think actually we managed to make these libraries join one common conversation across countries, seas, and continents, not only among speakers, but also among the collections. There was a conversation going on among our collections. And so we hope that we will inspire you, our audience, to new conversations. And because what we actually can conclude after these years where we have been working with this is that meanwhile we have been talking and having conversations, the ice has disappeared even more than when we started, and soon open water will let anyone sail up to the top of the world. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Lisa, so much. I'm delighted that we're part of this adventure, even though it is, alas, coming to an end. I would also like to thank Julianne Hartsoe-Lassen for all her help, and of course Mike and Tangard. They are now the Vice Consul of Denmark, with whom I've worked. We've worked together for probably more than a decade at this point. And then, last but not least, I really would love to thank the Consul General of Denmark, Anne Dorte Rigelsen. It's really been extraordinary to know you, and I know we will continue to work together in the future. As always, I'm also very grateful for the continued generosity of Celeste Bartos, of Manaz Ispahani Bartos, and of Adam Bartos. Now, as many of you know, over the last 7 or 8 years, I've been asking my guests to give me a biography of themselves in 7 words that might or might not define them. Sometimes takes a lot of probing to get them, but one usually manages. And so Simon's 7 words are immigrant, proud American, since Trump, less certain. Kim Leine's 7 words are man, nurse, husband, father, adulterer, junkie, writer. Please welcome them.
Thank you all very much for coming. I had so many emails today from people that would say, I'd love to come, but it's the Christmas party. It seems to be a big day for Christmas parties in publishing houses and agents and so forth. But you're brave, and you've given up alcohol and stuff for a couple of hours to listen to us. And I want to say thank you to Paul, not least because of this being a most poignant moment. This is his last event. There's a musical performance tomorrow, but this is essentially it. And he's done it for many years and done it brilliantly, I think. So Paul, a shout out to you. Thank you very much. And Kim, well, thank you. Thank you. Well, Kim, who flew over last night, I think.
Yes, yes.
This idea was first bruited by Paul when he and I went for a walk together in Sun Valley, Idaho last summer. And he told me about the Arctic Imagination Project. And I said I had been, because I used to be a geologist, to quite a lot of places in the Arctic. And he said, would you like to do this? And the vehicle by which we would do it at the library was that I would have a conversation with Kim. And so they sent a copy of this book, The Prophets of Eternal Fjord. And I was completely blown away with it. It is a most extraordinary book. I urge you, it came out in America, 2016, was it? About 2 years ago?
Yeah, yes.
Published by Liveright, which is a Norton imprint. And it is astonishing. It's also, not only is it a wonderful evocation of life in colonial Greenland in the late 18th and early 19th century, and in Copenhagen and other Scandinavian cities, it is also one of the filthiest books I've ever read. There is so much extremely good and graphic sex in it, and a lot of, I think you maybe know a lot of people that have extraordinary dietary, or rather gastric problems.
Yes.
They are described in extraordinary detail. Anyway, I loved it. I raced through it, and I come back, as we'll come later this evening, to individual passages. But I want to start this conversation, and hoping that your jet lag is okay, because this will be an hour and a half or so, by putting to you a very simple thesis. I think, and I dare say both of us have travelled to places like the Marquesas and the islands in the South Pacific, white sands, calm blue seas, gentle trade winds, palms leaning into the wind. That is most people's idea of paradise. You, however, assert that the Arctic, cold, difficult for people to survive, grey, in many ways wretched and miserable, is in fact the true paradise. On the face of it, that seems an absurdity. So please justify it. Why is the Arctic paradise?
Yeah, it's also a paradise disappearing, but also disappearing for me, because I was thrown out of paradise, and being thrown out of paradise is a strong motor for writing novels. So that's why I think I keep going back to it. But I came to Greenland in 1989, and I originally come from Norway. I grew up as a Jehovah's Witness, and ran away from Jehovah.
That's a very good, with no disrespect to anyone in the audience.
He was planning to kill me, I had to go away from him. And I...
Sorry, they were planning to kill you?
Jehovah was. Because,
really?
Yes, I knew that I wasn't good enough for Jehovah. And the first thing he would do when he started Armageddon was finding out where I was and come and kill me.
Good gracious.
So I ran away. And my father had divorced my mother some years earlier, and he lived in Copenhagen. And I ran away to him from Norway to Copenhagen and landed in a big capital. And it was incredible, and it was fantastic.
So how old were you?
I was 15, 16 years old.
And you spoke Norwegian, not Danish, presumably?
Yes.
Is Danish a difficult language?
No, I changed quite quickly from Norwegian to Danish.
Right.
But there were some other things that were quite difficult because I come from a sort of double isolation, a little village in Norway and encapsulated inside that little congregation of Jehovah's Witnesses. And then I remember one summer day in 1977, I came walking into a women's festival in Copenhagen. And I found myself all of a sudden in the middle of around 30,000 nude women.
Nude?
Yes.
Right.
It was, feminism in 1970 and,
right.
and so on. And then I found out now I can't use what I learned back home for anything. I have to start
Could you not
all over.
Try and convert them?
No.
Baptize them?
I would never try to do that. I thought it was fantastic what I was experiencing. So I converted myself instead.
Imagine, right.
Well, then I moved in with my father. He lived in an open homosexual relationship with another man. Right. And, well, there were some problems. I got sexually abused by him. That didn't last very long, but I had to run away again. So run away from my father into a relationship with a woman, got married, we got children, and then we went to Greenland.
Well, let me stop you at that point. I mean, good God, there's enough material in there for the rest of the afternoon. But did you have a romantic or some view of Greenland? Did you, for instance, read?
I knew nothing.
You know nothing about it at all?
No.
There's a writer which many of you may know, and I think you said you did know of him, Peter Freuchen.
Yeah. I didn't read him until I went to Greenland.
Ah.
So I knew. I grew up in Norway, and Norwegians know nothing about Greenland. I went to a school in Norway, and you don't learn anything about Greenland there. So I knew nothing about Greenland when I went there. I had the notion of some kind of colonial, post-colonial place, like Isak Dinesen, who I read, the Danish writer who went to Africa in 1911 and stayed there for 17 years, sort of burned out there and went home as a storyteller. That was my dream. I wanted to do the same thing.
Well, Peter Freuchen, he was an amazing storyteller. You never knew whether his stories were true. This is not going to continue in this vein, but I remember one particular scene where he had a very heavy beard, and he would tell stories about wandering all over Greenland. And one day he was repairing a boat, and he found, to his horror, that his beard, because of his breath and the moisture, had frozen to the boat, and he couldn't move his face.
No.
So I wonder if you were one of those puzzles. How do you get out of a dilemma like this? He had no knife or anything. So what he did do, and I hope nobody leaves at this point, but he passed a movement, I think that is the way to say it, and manipulated said movement with his hand, and as it froze, shaped it into a blade.
Yeah.
And then when it was fully formed, cut his beard away and released himself and presumably went for a very good shower. And you told me a story about wolves chasing him.
Yeah, he was chased by 50 wolves or something like that. And the last wolf ate the second last wolf, and they went on and on until there was only one wolf left, and he killed.
He killed that wolf.
Yes.
Yes, I think he's a teller of tall.
And he made
tales.
He made it plausible in the history. That's the magic of storytelling.
Right.
You know.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, go on then. Not inspired by.
No, but I went to Greenland in 1989, and I just wanted to go away from everything. And
89 or 79? 89.
89, yes.
Right.
Yes. And I want to change my identity. I wanted to be a Greenlander.
You left your wife and children?
No, they were with me.
They came
in
with
Greenland,
you?
Yes.
How did you get there?
By plane.
To
Nuuk. Kangerlussuaq.
Which was a former American base, isn't it?
Yes.
I think it was called Bluey West.
Until 92, I think it was. So back then it was an American base still. But I want to change identity, and then the Greenlandic identity presented itself to me, and I put it on, or tried to put it on, and I learned to speak the language. And that's very hard for a European to learn Greenlandic. For instance, the Greenlandic verbs have 640 conjugations. So it's, and I was sitting down listening to an old cassette recorder where a school teacher was repeating all these conjugations and letting a reindeer doing all the actions, the verbs, because it should have some local color. And I repeated what this poor reindeer was doing in 640 different moduses. And then I went to the hospital where I was working.
I can imagine you did, yes.
I was a nurse. That's why that's why I went to Greenland to work as a nurse. And I went.
Were you already a trained nurse?
Yes.
Back in Copenhagen.
Yes. I went to and tried to use what I'd learned on my patients. And I remember I asked an old woman sitting in her bed one morning, do you want to make love to me before or after breakfast? And she started to laugh. Of course, I thought I had said, do you want a shower before?
Right.
Because a shower, do you want a shower, is called asakosupit. But do you want to make love, is called asarosupit.
Right.
A lot of Greenlandic words are like that.
Right.
They are full of traps just to annoy,
This was the story you told your wife, is it? That you had said so whatever.
Yeah.
And she believed you?
Yeah.
Really?
And I also asked the patient, should I piss some more in your coffee cup? And so on. And what happens then is that people don't get angry. They laugh.
Yeah.
They started laughing, and you have to learn. This is the most important thing when you go to Greenland, is to learn to laugh at yourself. If you can do that, then you're okay, and you will be integrated into the Greenlandic community. So this was part of my integration process, because language, of course, is an important part of identity. So if you learn to use a new language perfectly, you sort of gain the identity that is hidden inside that language.
The name of Greenland to the Greenlanders is Kalaallit Nunaat, which means our land, isn't it?
It means the land of the Greenlanders.
Land of the Greenlanders.
Yes.
The name Greenland was given by
Eric the Red.
Eric the Red, having first of all found Iceland, and because he called it Iceland, no one wanted to go there. So he then moved on to Greenland, which was manifestly not green. He
committed murder twice.
Right, he'd been murdered
so
twice.
he was hunted, he was chased away, and he ended up in Greenland. And he found that it was very, very green. It sounds absurd. This is a big country covered with ice, but he came into a big fjord in southern Greenland and said it was very, very green. And Iceland was completely they had sheep and they eat the grass. So it was the grass was becoming more and more sparse in Iceland, but in Greenland it was very green, and so he called it Greenland. So it wasn't only sort of a slogan to make people come to Greenland. Right. He went back to Iceland, and a lot of Icelanders followed him to Greenland, and they started a community around 1980, 1990.
And where was all this? Because your experience is mainly in West Greenland, right?
Yeah,
Do we have the map?
Also East Greenland.
There was a map, I thought.
Yes.
Where is, I can't see. Oh, there it is, yes. And I don't have a laser pointer, but I'm actually going to scoot over there for a second. Oh, no, I can't, because there's no step. But the communities on the west side of the island and on the Canadian side, that's where the capital is, which is now called Nuuk.
Should I point it?
No, because we'll be in the same, there's no step here. You'll kill yourself.
No.
Anyway, so it used to be called Godhope, which is Good Hope, I think.
Yes.
And it's now called Nuuk. And my experiences, which we'll talk about a bit later, is all on the east coast. But you've also worked... Oh, very good, Paul. That's super. So, all right, move your hand
Nuuk.
Up a bit, up a bit.
Further up. Yes,
up.
further down.
Further down.
There.
There.
Nuuk.
But this is a 1922 map, so it would be called Godhavn.
Godthåb, it says somewhere.
About there.
A big fjord, complex of fjord.
Yeah.
It's around there, yes.
Very good, Paul. Where's what? Yeah, move your hand just a wee bit. Go to on the other side. See that enormous fjord? That's Scoresby Sund. We'll talk about that later. So if you can bear those two things in mind so that we don't have to have Paul racing back and forth on your last day at the library. So, all right, so you spent how many years there?
15 years. I went to after 3 years in Nuuk, where I tried to become a Greenlander, and they ended up calling me Kelek, which is the title of my first novel.
Right.
I went home and looked it up, and it said it means a real Greenlander, and I became enormously proud. But after some time, I found out that what people shout after you in the street and what's in no library is necessarily the same thing, and that Kelek should rather be understood as stupid idiots.
Oh, brilliant.
So that's that was my new identity.
Right.
And I got it from the Greenlanders themselves. So I'm very grateful.
Armed with this identity, then you left the capital.
Yes, I went to the East Greenland.
And where to Angmar?
Further south, Ammassalik.
Which is where
further south.
Paul was showing you that big fjord on the east coast, and about.
I can point.
Well, you can you? Well, it's about halfway down. You can see some. You're going to go and do it. All right.
It's here.
Yeah.
It's called Ammassalik here. It's called Basila today.
And that is the closest point to Iceland. It's about 180 miles, and the sea between is called the Denmark Strait, and all sorts of.
Around 3,000 people live there.
Right.
And they have their own language. There are 3 languages in Greenland: West Greenlandic, and East Greenlandic, and North West Greenlandic. And I learned
all of them.
Sorry.
You learned all of those languages.
No, the two. First, West Greenland and East Greenlandic. They're quite alike. So it's like Swedish and Norwegian or something.
I seem to remember, just digging back into memory, there's. What is an umiak?
It's a woman's boat.
A woman's boat.
Or it's a big cargo boat rowed by women.
Yeah.
It's enormous, and it's covered with seal skin.
So, what was your daily life like? Were you like an imperial person, or did you? You said you tried to become a Greenlandic.
Yeah, well, I worked as sort of a village doctor, you can say.
Right.
I did everything. Received babies that were born.
When you say received them, did you?
Yeah, what do you call it? Like
if you're a midwife or
midwife, yes,
right,
yes,
or a doula or something like that.
Yes.
So you've actually done that.
Yeah, lots of times. And when people hurt themselves, it's a dangerous place, and people use rifles in their work, so they get hurt, and they get ill, and there's no doctor, and you have to just take care of those sort of things. So every day I had to do something I wasn't educated to doing.
So can you remember the first child you delivered?
Yeah. It was October 1992.
Right.
And I met him in Tivoli, the entertainment park in Copenhagen.
Recently?
Yes.
You met the child?
He greeted me very politely from his mother. His mother told him, that's your midwife.
That's so sweet. Did he have your name?
Yeah, he knew my name.
No, but his mother didn't call him?
No. He had some, I don't even know what his name was. But,
that's so sweet.
Well, that was my work for 5 years. And then we went back to Denmark because we had children, and the children who had an opportunity to find out if they were Greenlandic or Danish. And so we went to a place at the countryside in Denmark.
So when you were stick to Nuuk for the time being, or Ammassalik, did you learn how to kayak, for instance?
No, I didn't. I never. I learned to drive dogs, to use a dog sled. I had 16 dogs, and I had boats, and I have had a lot of rifles, and went hunting.
I seem to remember one, maybe you can confirm this for me, in Alaska and Arctic Canada, the dogs are in a line in front of the sled. But in Greenland, it's called a fan trace.
No, not necessarily.
Not necessarily, but they've just,
Western Greenland is a fan.
yeah.
In Eastern Greenland, they are after each other, but with each have their own line. So that's different from Canada and Alaska.
But the interesting, or perhaps rather vulgar thing is that if you're sitting driving the sled with the dogs all in line, you just see one asshole.
Yes.
And if you have 16 dogs in a fan trace,
Yeah.
your view is not of the magnificent mountains of Greenland,
No,
but it's of 16
yes,
assholes
yes.
being in New York. So I shouldn't have said that. Okay, so did you went hunting? For you didn't do that in your kayak, but
Yeah,
did you
no,
go-
I hunted seals for my dogs,
right.
and I had dogs to help me hunt seals. So it was just a sort of thing that went wrong.
There was a dish I remember. You hunt you have a seal, and you take out its insides and stuff it with lots of birds.
Yeah, you have a seal skin. That's what they do in the north. And you stuff it with birds. You
Yeah.
don't take the feathers off or anything.
And then roast it.
Roast it? No. You lock the sealskin with maybe 50 or 70 birds inside, and you dig it into the ground, and you let it leave it there for 3 months, so it really gets rotten, and you take it up and you eat it.
Right.
Yes,
Delicious.
yes.
They also drink quite a lot, with sort of enthusiasm, do they not? Beer, but also, which is ull, isn't that right? What
Yeah.
is the Danish word for beer?
Ull.
Ull.
Yes.
Do they make beer in?
Well, they used to do not so much anymore because beer has become cheaper. But the alcohol consumption isn't that big. It's they have another drinking pattern than Danish, and sort of the same drinking pattern they have in northern Norway and Finland and Sweden and so on.
What is this drinking pattern?
An explosive way of drinking.
Explosive drink,
They just empty the bottle, and throw it away. And,
and then eat a rotten confection
Yes,
of
yes.
old seal
Yeah,
and
yeah.
birds. Yes. But you nonetheless enjoyed it. This is paradise. Is it?
yes, it felt free, and I was sort of free of my past, and I got my friends there, and there was an intimacy also with the dangerous nature. And when I'm sure you have had this experience yourself, when you get some kind of intimacy with nature, you end up really loving it and get a very close relationship to it.
When you left, and I don't want to dwell on this too much, but you had a personally rather bad time.
Yes, I got divorced. I went back to Greenland after we went to Denmark, and I started going back and forth from Denmark to Greenland. And it's very far. It can take a whole week to come from Denmark to Greenland. You start in a big Boeing 474 or something like that, and every time you change vehicle, it becomes smaller and smaller, and until you end up in a little boat or a dog sled, and you come to a village. And those two places are so different, Denmark and a little village in Greenland, that they can't be inside your head at the same time. So you have to choose. And I chose Greenland. And I got depressed because I was away from my children. But when I was in Denmark, I was depressed because I wasn't in Greenland. So this was a hopeless situation. And therefore I did what I always have done when I couldn't find out what to do. I did nothing. And I thought maybe time will find out something for me. And time did find out something for me in the fall of 2001, where I got a nervous breakdown and started to self-medicate. And this happened at the same time as the catastrophe here in New York. And it was the first international news that we got streamed directly on the television.
In Denmark or in Greenland?
Greenland.
Right.
So I sat down and turned on my television and saw the airplane crash into the
World
Trade Center,
yeah.
and I sort of felt more and more. I'm sorry, but I've more and more relieved or happy or something. And I thought I seemed to have found my drug. So it was the pills that had done this for me. And after that, I went on taking more and more pills and become an addict. And it took about 3 years. And then I was kicked out.
Of Greenland?
Yes. I went back to Denmark and started to...
I mean, who kicked you out? The authorities?
Yeah, the doctor, yes. And it was very undramatic, and they were very nice to me. But they took my authorization as a nurse and said goodbye, and I went back to Denmark.
And it was at that point you decided to write?
Well, I sat down in Denmark and wrote my first novel, and it came out 2 years after that.
And this was a series, it was a trilogy, wasn't it?
No, the first one was an autobiographical novel.
Right.
I wrote about all my problems. So I just had to clear the table and get it out of the system. This wasn't what I really want to write. I wanted to write epic novels, good stories, you know. But I knew I had to write about myself first, just to get a tabula rasa.
Mm-hmm. And then when did you begin work on this extraordinary book, The Prophets
Well, I
of
started
Eternal
that
Fjord?
in 2010, and it came out in 2012. And I knew I wanted to write about Greenland in the colonial time.
Right.
I didn't know at that time that I wanted to write a trilogy, because it's the first part of a trilogy. Second part came out this year in Denmark. So I just wrote it, and it takes place in the 1780s and 90s. And the second one takes place 70 years or 60 years prior to it, when the first colony of Greenland was founded in 1728.
It's the story essentially of a young minister, Morten Falk.
Yeah.
And first of all, he was also like you from Norway,
Yes.
comes down to Copenhagen, trains as a minister, and gets up to all sorts of adventures while he's in training. And your descriptions of late 18th century Copenhagen are just remarkable. And then he finally gets on a boat, an icebreaker, with his cow, because he decides he wants to take a cow with him.
Yes.
And he feeds the cow as it goes through the Shetland Islands and the Faroes and up into Iceland, and then finally round Cape Farewell, which is the cape at the southern tip of Greenland, and then up the west coast to what was then called Godthåb. And then all sorts of extraordinary things happen, and I won't go into them in any detail, but I'd love you now, if you can, to read a small section of the book.
Okay.
We've decided on 3 little bits.
Yes.
So this,
If we have time.
well, I think we will. The first bit is going to be in Copenhagen, is that right?
Yes. In Copenhagen. Oh, that one. Yes. I see. Morten Falk is walking around in Copenhagen, observing. Morten conducts observations of human nature. He stands in the shadows, resting in the security of his cynicism and disillusionment. He watches the transactions of suppliers and customers, and the purchased service is often delivered on the spot. There are many men about the town on such an ordinary night, many of them fine gentlemen, as far as he can tell, whose lust cannot be contained within the respectable confines of wedlock. He wonders what lies were told on their leaving home and what replies were uttered in return. What was the lady of the house aware of his intentions? And is he aware of her knowledge? Is there a contract, a mutual understanding? And is the lady happy that such places and persons are found to take care of those aspects of marriage she finds displeasing? Morten smiles to himself. In this dim light ahead, he hears there is something afoot. Sorry. He tiptoes forward, holding his breath. The sounds become clearer, the rustle of damask, the slapping of flesh, a man's voice issuing instructions as to what services he wishes to receive for the monies paid, and in what manner. Slowly his eyes become used to the dark. The girl is of tender age and kneeling. It looks as if she is praying, and perhaps she is. The man is standing, leaning back against a tree. He looks as if he is studying the firmament above the rampart, or else dictating a letter to his secretary. He wafts his face with his tricorn hat to cool himself in the sticky air of evening. Morten Falk observes it all, not because it arouses him, he tells himself, but because he wishes to learn. Soon you will be dead, he muses, and I shall make fine illustrations of your dismembered bodies. But what do these women do about their own lust, he wonders, or rather, he knows. They go to church with it, to the priest, to me, and therefore it is important for me to be one to whom nothing in this life remains unknown. That is why I am here. He finds a measure of comfort in the thoughts.
It's a very good indication of the direction the book is going to take, I think. So let me just briefly tell a little of my own
Thank you.
knowledge
Because
of
you know, Greenland is it generates good stories in some magic way.
It does. I mean, I would agree with you. I mean, I asked you the question about paradise at the beginning, but Greenland has an enormously magnetic pull, clearly so for you. And I've been there now 4 or 5 times, I suppose. But the first time I was there, I had this extraordinary experience. We were a group of 6 undergraduates from university in England, and we were going off to do some geology during the summer of 1965, quite a long time ago now. And so we went to Copenhagen, got on an icebreaker called the Taylor Dam, which took us to Scoresby. And so many things I remember about it. The first time you see ice at sea, there's this thing called ice blink, which is a white line on the horizon, which is the reflection from the pack ice that you're heading towards. And then you start ramming your way through it. And eventually you get to this little Greenlandic settlement called Scoresby, which is on the north side of that enormous fjord, which is called Scoresby. And then we got a little Inuit boat, which took us across the fjord, which was then completely free of ice. And we were landed on the southern side and then climbed up. We had skis and we had sleds, and we went up to the glacier and sledded for about 3 months, way up onto the ice cap, where we collected for a specific geological field program samples of rock, and then came back with the intention of catching an icebreaker back, the last one of the season. I think there were 2 a year. And when we got to the cliffs at the southern side of the fjord, it wasn't clear water, it was full of ice. So I was the radio operator, so I called Scoresby and said, what can we do? They said, well, it's a big problem. The ice has been blown in from the Denmark Strait, and we can't get our little boat to you. We'll try. You have to wait a few days. And so we did. We essentially ran out of food. So, and this is a horrendous thing to say, but I actually shot and killed a polar bear and to eat it, because we had Weetabix and margarine were the only two things we had. So to liven it up a bit, we got a polar bear. And that was revolting because, A, if any of you have such a situation in your lives, you must never, ever eat the liver of a polar bear because it's so full of vitamin A. But also this was a very elderly bear, and its muscles were full of flatworms, planaria, which you would pull out of it before you boiled it. Anyway, it kept us alive. And then we, and I promise you I won't take up time, so I want to get back to Kim's story.
No.
But we, eventually the little boat radioed and said he was about 6 miles away from us. He could see our tents. And the only way that we would get to him was to walk across the ice floes. And as you will know, an ice floe is like a mushroom. It's thick in the middle, but tapers off to the sides. And so we left everything behind, including our radio, but put our samples of rock, it's about 60 pounds each, on our backs, and started walking over these shifting floes of ice, and you knew that if you fell either off them or through them, it was 1,000 feet of ice-cold water, which you'll remember very well. And finally we got to within sight of the boat, and he was about 100 yards away with his bow hard up against a floe, and he said, "I will try and push it towards you." And these floes weigh thousands of tons. And he put his engines to full ahead, and slowly, slowly, slowly the gap closed to about 9 feet. And he said, "That's as far as we can go. You'll have to jump." And so we did. All of us got through except the leader of the expedition, a chap called John Rutledge, went through the edge and went whistling down into the sea. And we managed to belay him and pulled him back. And he was instantly frozen. His beard froze. Everything froze. But what you're not to do is to give alcohol. You must hug him, and which we did. And he slowly came back to life. Then we had other adventures. By the time we got to Scoresbyton, the icebreaker had left. So there was no way to get home at all. And it was now getting dark and getting cold, and you will know what September, October is like in Greenland. The weather gets bad. So we had to build an airstrip. There was no airstrip, but we cleared the rocks from a flattish part of the territory, borrowed oil drums, kerosene, put rags in the top, and radioed, or eventually by now we're in a little town, so they were able to get in touch with a pilot called Bjorn Palsen in Reykjavik, and he agreed to come and pick us up. Little Cessna. He came, landed on this new strip we had made, picked up 3 of us, and the remaining 3, which I was one, we had to stay. And so he took them away, and it now got dark. There was a blizzard, so we went around lighting these little kerosene rags, and you could see this landing strip sort of going off into the distance, and we thought he's never going to come back. But he did, and he circled and then landed and said, "Quick, quick, get in." So we got in, and an hour later, we were sitting in the Lofladi Hotel in Keflavik, drinking beer and eating good food, and then caught the British Airways flight to Aberdeen and then to London, and we told the department at Oxford that we had succeeded, we were back, and they said fine, and we went and had a celebratory tea, all looking frightful because we hadn't washed for 3 months at the Savoy Hotel. We were sitting there in the Savoy, if you can imagine, feeling happy and cheerful, until a messenger came and said that John Rutledge, the man that had fallen through, was wanted on the telephone, and he came back ashen, and he said that was the department in Oxford, and they've just heard that Bjorn Palsen, the man that picked us up, had been killed that morning, picking another group of people up from the northwest claw of Iceland. And of course that was terrible. But my wife and I were in Iceland 5 or 6 years ago, and I was telling this story, and they said, "You knew Bjorn Palsen." Everyone in Iceland remembers the day he was killed. He was our great national hero, a truly wonderful man. And that's another thing, is it not? And I won't talk any more about this, but the Arctic breeds remarkable people.
Yes, yes.
People who are courageous and selfless and heroic.
I think it's because you're in direct contact
With
with the
nature.
reality, with the physical environment. And so you have to, you don't have all these filters behind yourself and like telephones and we have in the modern world, and so therefore it's also easier to tell stories with this low technology reality of the past, I think. And that's also because that's also why it creates remarkable deeds and remarkable persons.
Much of what the Arctic Imagination project is all about is about the environment and about global warming, because I think, as you have said in your writings, the Arctic is the canary in the coal mine. It's the first and most dramatic indication of climate change. During the years you were there, did you begin to notice changes that
Absolutely.
you give us?
There was a big glacier behind the village where I was living, in Nuuk, in East Greenland, and it just evaporated completely. We were skiing there, and the kids were sledding there, but after some years it was completely gone. It was very sad, because the land that you see when the ice is disappearing is really disgusting. It looks disgusting and dirty. So you prefer the white ice and snow.
Yes, they would always say, would they not, in Greenland settlements, when spring comes round and the snow goes away, the flowers come up, but the flowers are actually great piles of dog shit that have been buried by snow. But suddenly they're there, and that's all there is, really.
Yes.
But this presumably gets a great deal worse, I suppose. You also mentioned, talking about dogs, that that was another symptom of the growing, the warmth and the lessening of the amount of ice cover, that dog teams were not being used as much.
No, they shoot their dogs now.
Really?
Hardly any dogs left in East Greenland, because you can't sled when there's no ice. The ice in Greenland is the motorway of the highway of the dog sleds. So they have to shoot their dogs. There are hardly any left. They use them as pets. I think some Danish families use them as pets, but the Greenlanders they kill their dogs.
Do you think well, I dare say you're not optimistic, but you're making this effort to tell us about the Arctic and the fragility of the place and how it must be protected. Similarly, Olafur Eliasson has got this project. He's transported huge chunks of ice from Greenland, I think, to initially Copenhagen. I think they're in London at the moment, aren't they?
Okay.
Giving people the opportunity to feel ice, to feel the nature of cold, to hear the sort of fizzing sound as air, which has been trapped for thousands of years in these pieces of ice, is released.
Yes.
It's a beautiful project, isn't it?
Yes.
But you cannot be optimistic, I assume, with what is happening.
I don't know. For the Greenlanders, yes, I'm optimistic, because they're extremely good at adapting to a new environment. I think they will manage fine. There are hunters, They are an improvising culture, whereas we are a peasant culture. We are used to planning far ahead. And if the reality is changing day by day, we get problems. But the Greenlanders, I think they are doing fine.
Is there any industry in Greenland?
Hardly any.
Should there be any?
Fishing industry, a little bit, but the cod has gone away. And there is shrimp. That's the biggest export in Greenland today. And that's really the only thing there is. And there is a growing tourism. So more and more people go to Greenland to watch climate change. It's real time, because you can be on a boat and see it here and now. So it's very dramatic, almost entertaining. And so the tourism industry is growing. But that's just about it. There's a hope to have an aluminium industry by maybe 5,000 or 7,000 Chinese coming into the country and running it. And then aluminium industry is polluting enormously. It's a very pollutive industry. And they hope to get some mining industry, because there are so many minerals. There's gold and platinum and all kind of plutonium. and all kinds of minerals. And there is oil. There's twice as much oil as they have in Norway. So there are lots of potential for industries, and of course they need some industry because they want independence from Denmark. They don't have full independence yet, but to get full independence, they need money, because they get a lot of money from Denmark each year.
I mean, it used to be said, did it not, that, and I think this was when Greenland had a population of about 45,000, that it would be far cheaper to bring them all to Copenhagen and put them up in suites in the main hotels in Copenhagen. Paying full rate would be much less money than the Danish government spends on maintaining them in Greenland itself. Does Denmark want to get rid of Greenland or not?
No, they want to keep them, also because they have a great economical potential, of course, and Denmark doesn't want to get rid of that. But there is also a close and warm relationship between Greenland and Denmark. We mustn't forget that. But Greenlanders, they aren't Danish. They are Greenlanders, and they feel like Greenlanders, and they feel like a nation, but they are still depending on Denmark. So that is very humiliating for them, and so they need some kind of independence in the near future.
So the Chinese, for instance, attempt to build this aluminium, or aluminum as they say here, industry in Greenland. Would that give sufficient income for them to be able to say,
no,
okay,
it wouldn't be enough.
It wouldn't be enough.
But Greenland is also geopolitically very in a strategic position, because they are close to the North Pole, and there's fight for the North Pole now between both USA and Russia and others, and Greenland is, like a little fish in the middle of this conflict. And if they declare independence, who knows what will happen to this small country? So maybe it's better that until now they stay with Denmark. Yes.
I always remember there's one of the near you, my old professor at University of Chap called Lawrence Wager was sailing down the coast in, I think, 1932, and saw an extraordinary rock formation, which he said he thought were sedimentary rocks, because they were layered so beautifully. But they got off and found that these rocks were actually, it was an enormous body of igneous material which had cooled so slowly that the various component parts had developed into fractions of very pure minerals. I mean, there's an equivalent one in Montana, where there's a line straight snakes through the forest of pure platinum, chromium, which you hit it with a hammer and it just rings. And that's America's strategic reserve of chromium. Well, this one in Greenland, which is called the Skaergaard intrusion, mostly covered by ice in the 1930s, known to be full of palladium, platinum, gold, but unminable. Except now the ice has melted away, and there's this body of rock which is just waiting for miners to come. And so a group of Australians, a company called Platina Investments, did a deal with the Greenland local government to mine there, at least to do an experimental, and found that the amount of gold was unbelievable. I mean, a huge amount. So they set up camp in Iceland and moved about 50 miners over, dug the first big hole. And overnight, everything changed, because they woke one morning to find dozens upon dozens of polar bears menacing them and telling them to get out of town. And so they left. They called in the helicopters and they left. So it's nice to think that the polar bears are protecting Greenland against the rapacious...
They're part of the Greenlandic military. They're keeping
exactly.
away.
Yeah, right, exactly. Well, I think, why don't we have one more section of reading and then perhaps throw this open to the audience.
Okay.
You can choose either the little piece that I selected about your arrival at the settlement.
Yeah.
Or will you do that?
Yes, I will. Yes, they're on their way to Greenland, and it's a long journey sailing from Copenhagen to Greenland, because you have the wind against you all the time, and you go drift off course to Norway, to the Shetland Islands, to Faroe Islands and Iceland, and you zigzag your way, and then finally, after about 2 months, you reach your destination.
With
Greenland.
the cow, and the cow was okay.
With a cow, yes. Yeah. And the cow survives. And I'm excused for my bad pronunciation. Is I'm not used to reading aloud in English.
Perfectly all right.
They near their destination. A time is drawing to a close. It is the 16th of August, and they have been underway for 2.5 months. The men hang in the ropes and peer into the fog. Morten Falk holds prayer on the deck. He allows the crew to confess their sins. All have been troubled by impure thoughts. They have taken the name of the Lord in vain, have spoken ill of their fellow men, and abandoned themselves in self-abuse. All the usual. He demands no more of them. He places his hand on their foreheads and gives them the benedictions. Your sins are forgiven, he says. Cast away your chains, go forth into the world and do good. They become as children, smiling gently and becoming calm. Their faces light up, the miracle of the blessing. These are good Christian people, he thinks of himself, and finds it sad that he will soon be removed from them. Voices sound in the fog. Women, the laughter of women. One of the seamen shouts and points. Kayaks and skin boats approach. The oarswomen of the latter wear their hair tied up in a knot. Morten finds them a funny sight. They look over their shoulders as they row, faces shining like copper coins. Are they singing? Savages. At last, he thinks. At last he is to meet the true savages, whom he shall guide in the time to come and turn towards salvation and freedom in Jesus Christ the Lord. This is quite another matter than the laziness of the hybrids he encountered at Gotthub. He feels overwhelmed with gratitude for having been permitted to be part of this, for being designated such a role in life, and he must descend into the cabin and lie down to rest one final time on the bunk where the lice seep forth and mingle with those that inhabit his clothing. He hears the salute from the shore, a feeble splutter of the colony cannon, and voices that cry hooray. He hears the anchor cast, the rope run over the side. He feels the vessel turn and settle, boots trample back and forth on the deck above him. The unloading commences. The rowing boat is swung out and gently buffets the side of the vessel. He hears Rosalil low at the top of her lungs. The colony bell tolls without pause. He lies on his back on the bunk. He has folded his hands. He looks up at the ceiling. This cabin, this ship, is still Danish ground. Invisible threads run all the way back from here to Denmark and further still to the home of his childhood. And yet he remains unreleased. There is still a chain. But once he steps ashore, it will be broken and he will be free.
Lovely. Thank you very much. But I want to ask you one last thing. We've been transfixed in this country, and maybe you've been reading about it also in Denmark, with a young American missionary called John Chua, I think, who tried to bring the word of God, he was a Christian, to North Sentinel Island in the Andaman Islands off India. And he was killed by the islanders, who did not want any foreigner. They do not want contact with the outside world. And he had said before he was killed that it was his Christian duty to go there and bring them the enlightenment of Christ. This is what your hero was doing. This is what many, many people. Do you think it is right, looking back on it, that missionaries went to bring God to the Greenlanders?
To Greenland, it was a good thing. I myself, I'm an atheist, but I think I can see that bringing Christianity to Greenland was a good thing for Greenlanders, because the priests taught Greenlanders to read and write. So there was no illiteracy after a couple of generations. And this is very important for a culture to learn to read and write, because you learn to think about yourself and talk about yourself and define yourself in a totally new way when you learn to write, because you can communicate over distances and you can communicate to the people who come after you. So you have to think about yourself and your identity in a completely new way. So they gained a lot from Christianity. And but I think in the middle of this cultural leap, they could also look over their shoulders and see, okay, we lost something there. And you can still feel that loss the day to day, because people, they sort of, they miss the old religion and the old faith, and are trying to come back. Young people in crisis, they all often go back to the old religion, go into the mountain and seek the spirits. But Christianity is very, very strong in Greenland, and it has had an enormous impact for Greenlandic culture. The tradition of psalm, of writing psalms, is very strong in Greenland, and the literary culture. The first colored newspaper in the world was made in Greenland during the colonial times. That's very special. It's unique. You don't see that in any other colony in the world.
Would you say that Greenlanders are nowadays a happy people, or does the whole issue of independence weigh on
the
them?
broad average Greenlander is prosperous and looking forward. They don't look back at the colonial times at all. They are interested in all the important things that are happening here and now. The ice melting, Greenland's geopolitically important role in the big politics, and their wish to become independent, and all this. This is what they are thinking about now.
Do the Danish royal family go there from time to time?
The Danish
Royal family?
Oh yes, they go there regularly, and our crown prince has had his a really big time in Greenland. We met some weeks ago, and we talked a lot about Greenland, because Greenland means very much to the royal family.
He's married to an Australian, isn't he, I think?
Yes.
Yes, I met
From
her.
Tasmania.
From Tasmania, indeed. Well, look, I think we'll throw it open to the audience if anybody has got... I can't really see because of the lights here, but has anyone got a question that they'd like to put to Kim, or indeed to anyone here, about the Arctic, about global warming, about canaries in coal mines?
Come up here to the mic and ask an intelligent question.
Well, or... There's someone coming to ask an intelligent question. Great.
Well, I hope so.
Do your
My
best.
Yes, I'm curious if you could talk a little bit about, in terms of the whole Arctic project and the artists engaging with huge political tragedies that are unfolding, if you feel that there has been an actual impact on policy that comes out of these projects, and also if it's possible to, once the project ends, to continue it through networks or through other types of working between the institutions and the people that have been involved. Thank you.
My hearing is...
Basically, the question, if I can summarize, is this project, Arctic Imagination,
Okay. Yes.
is it having an effect on policy?
I don't know, but
Is anyone listening?
I think so. But it has involved also a Greenlandic writer, a very young writer, Søren Stenholt. I think that's been one of the most important things to involve also the Greenlanders, so that we in Denmark not just make a lot of projects about Greenland without involving Greenlanders themselves. So that was a very positive thing, I think.
What is this writer's name and what is he writing?
Søren Stenholt, she's a novelist.
Oh, a woman.
Yes.
Right.
There's a little boom of young Greenlandic writers right now. The Greenlandic literature has sort of been lying dead for 50 years or something, because the Greenlandic language was suppressed after the colonial time, not during the colonial time, but after it. And the people were not supposed to speak Greenlandic anymore. And so they stopped also to write literature in Greenlandic. And not until now it has become to maybe return a little.
What is the feeling in Denmark about man's role in creating global warming? I mean, I think you're aware that in this country, certainly members of this administration in Washington deny that it's anything to do with us. And so abandon various protocols and walk out of various agreements. I assume that is not the case in Denmark.
No, there's a general consensus that it's man-made. But I think maybe it's 10% or something agree with the critics, and I think it's not man-made. It's just solar that comes from the sun or something
Right.
like that. Yeah.
Anybody else out there? Well, in that case, I think Kim will thank you very much indeed for coming here.
Thank
Thank you so much. Simon, Kim, thank you.
Very much.